This evening, Bayer Leverkusen face Atalanta in the UEFA Europa League final. If they win, it will take their record for the season, in all competitions, to 52 games played, 43 won, 9 drawn, and 0 lost. This is Leverkusen's penultimate game of the season. Their final game comes in just 3 days' time, when they head to the Olympiastadion in Berlin to lock horns with second Bundesliga strugglers FC Kaiserslautern in the final of the DFB Pokal. It has already been an incredible season for Leverkusen. Winning the Bundesliga title alone would have been remarkable, let alone going invincible. But if they can overcome Atalanta and Kaiserslautern, they will become the first team in the history of European football to win a continental treble while going undefeated in every single competition. I was recently asked whether that would constitute the single greatest achievement in the history of world football, and it's not a bad question. So in today's video, I wanted to examine the competition. Unlike in other sports, there has never been a so-called perfect season in professional football, that is to say, a season in which a team has won every single one of their games in all competitions. In fact, there have only been a handful of perfect league seasons worldwide, and none since Sunrise Flak United completed the feat in Mauritius during the 1990s. Now, with all due respect to the Mauritian Football League pyramid, and I mean that, when assessing the greatest seasons of all time, it's not just results or trophy hauls that have to be taken into account, but also the calibre of the opposition and the level of the competition. If Bayer Leverkusen win an invincible treble this season, it will be one of the greatest seasons of all time, but it would undoubtedly be even greater if, instead of the Europa League, they went unbeaten and won the Champions League. You get the idea. To be clear, it is just the greatest seasons that we're interested in, not the greatest teams per se. That is, a different video that I made a while ago. It's only clubs that are eligible, not national teams, and there will be plenty of honourable mentions towards the end because, believe me, whittling the entire history of world football down to the 7 greatest seasons was not an easy task. Without further ado then, whose own greatest season was arguably his first sadly, aged only 15, here are, in my view, though I think based on some quite compelling evidence, the 7 greatest football seasons of all time. 7th, Ajax, 1994-95. Ajax are one of the great institutions of world football. They are not only 36-time Dutch and 4-time European champions, they have gifted the world some of the game's greatest exponents and shaped the way in which the sport is played. In his first job in management, appointed in 1991, Ajax boss Louis van Gaal took great influence from Michels, Cruyff and the most famous Ajax team of them all. Ajax played a similar formation to in the 70s, often referred to as a 3-1-3-3, which appeared to be fluid, but was actually extremely well drilled. Although the Ajax team was dripping in individual brilliance and genius, they played under strict instructions from Van Gaal, with their movements, structure, and overloads heavily choreographed. Ajax had an incredibly youthful team. When they beat Fabio Capello's AC Milan team of Maldini, Costa Curta and Baresi 1-0 in the final of the Champions League, there were only 2 players over the age of 25 in their starting 11. Frank Rijkaard, who had won 2 European Cups with AC Milan before returning to Ajax to dethrone his former club, was the brains of Milan's backline, operating as a sweeper in tandem with the team's only other veteran and captain Danny Blind. From 1 through to 11, Ajax had superstars in every position, who either already had, in the case of those 2, or who would go on to have sensational careers. There was Edwin van der Sar, who revolutionised goalkeeping through his ball-playing and distribution abilities, Edgar Davids, who Van Gaal described as his pitbull, Clarence Seedorf, who is the only man to win a Champions League with 3 different teams, the terrifying speed and athleticism of Mark Overmars and Finidi George on the wings, and even off the bench, in that Champions League final, Ajax were able to introduce future Arsenal legend Nwankwo Kanu and the eventual match winner Patrick Kluivert. The star of the Ajax team in actual fact was Jari Litmanen, Van Gaal's inspired number 10 who made everything tick, while scoring and creating goals at will. He was unfortunate only to finish 3rd in 1995 Ballon d'Or voting, and were it not for injuries, he would be remembered as one of the greatest players of his generation. The combination of Ajax's flawless organisation, youthful zeal, and pioneering use of data analytics, along with the sheer talent at Van Gaal's disposal, resulted in an unforgettable campaign. Ajax went invincible in the Eredivisie, winning 27 and drawing 7 of their 34 games to be crowned as Dutch champions, while beating the reigning European champions, AC Milan, twice in the Champions League group stage and for a third time in the final. Ajax in 1994-95 are the only team ever to win the Champions League and go unbeaten in the league in the same season, and their only defeat across all 3 competitions came against their great rivals Feyenoord, after extra time, in the quarter-finals of the KNVB Cup. Ajax won the Intercontinental Cup the following season, overcoming Gremio on penalties, lifting the Eredivisie title again, and reaching a second successive Champions League final, where they only lost on penalties against Juventus. Unfortunately, over the next few years, the likes of Seedorf, Kanu, Davids, Reitziger, Kluivert, Van der Sar, Overmars, and both De Boer brothers all departed, but in the 1994-95 season, Ajax were the best team in the world and one of the greatest of all time. 6th, Sao Paulo, 1993. The world of football doesn't start and finish at the borders of Europe, and whilst the finances of football make it difficult for South American clubs to compete on a level footing with European ones now, as recently as the early 1990s, and arguably even later, the best team in the world was based in Brazil. Tele Santana first managed Sao Paulo in 1973, and by the time that he returned in 1990, he had taken Brazil into the 1982 and 1986 World Cups. Neither of those teams won the World Cup, but Brazil's 1982 team captured the hearts and minds of football fans worldwide like almost no other, and that team was a true reflection of the way in which Santana viewed the game. Sometimes described as having reinvented Brazil's O Joga Bonito style, Sao Paulo's team of the early to mid-1990s was extremely attack-minded, with an emphasis on technical ability, but also drew some influence from the great Dutch team of the 1970s, just like Ajax also did during the 1990s, and Santana even said that his dream would have been to manage the Netherlands at the 1974 World Cup. The combination of Brazilian relationism, flair, and invention, with the fluidity and interchangeability of total football, created something quite special. Sao Paulo won the Campeonato Paulista, the Copa Libertadores, and overcame Johan Cruyff's Barcelona Dream Team in the Intercontinental Cup in 1992, something that was of special significance to Santana, given the reverence that he had for Cruyff as both a player and a coach, but their Everest came in 1993. A star-studded squad featuring the likes of Cafu, Ray, Muller and Palinha won a historic quadruple, beating Flamengo and Cruzeiro to claim the Supercopa Sudamericana and the Recopa Sudamericana, cruising to a second straight Copa Libertadores crown, winning the first leg of their final 5-1 against Universidad Católica, and following up their victory against Cruyff's Barcelona by beating Fabio Capello's AC Milan to make it back-to-back Intercontinental Cup successes. There were 6 Sao Paulo players in Brazil's 1993 Copa America squad, which was a reflection of their dominance, and it could have been even more. Sao Paulo are the only team in this 7 not to have won a league championship in the season in question, but they only actually lost 3 games across the entire Campeonato Brasileiro Serie A season, and only missed out on a spot in the final by 1.2 Palmeiras. Their utter continental, and indeed intercontinental dominance, accomplished with such style and panache, is nonetheless enough to earn them a spot in 6th. 5th, PSV, 1987-88. The second season by a Dutch club in this 7, just 7 years before Ajax, became the only club to ever go invincible in the league and win either the European Cup or the Champions League in the same season. PSV enjoyed arguably an even more remarkable campaign, hard as that might be to believe. Led by the great Guus Hiddink, who, similarly to Van Gaal, was in his first stint in senior management, and actually in his very first season in Hiddink's case, PSV were looking to build upon a season in which they had won the Eredivisie title, but were knocked out in the first round of the European Cup by Bayern Munich, and fell in the round of 16 of the KNVB Cup against FC Den Bosch. They were looking to build upon that, it should be said, following a summer in which they lost their star man Ruud Gullit for a world record fee to AC Milan. Ajax legend Soren Lerby was Hittink's only major summer arrival, but this was a PSV squad which could still boast the likes of Ronald Koeman, Eric Herretz, Willy van der Kerkhoff, and the ever-prolific Wim Keft. Everywhere you looked, there were internationals. The Dutch team that won Euro 88 at the end of this season, which is the only major tournament that the Netherlands have ever won, featured no fewer than 5 PSV players, 3 of whom started in the final. Hittink's men retained the Eredivisie title, and whilst they didn't go invincible like Ajax, they were incredibly comfortable. Not only did they only lose 2 games all season, winning the title by 9 points, in an era where a win only granted you 2 points, they scored an incredible 117 goals and only conceded 28. That's an average of 3.5 goals scored a game at about 0.82 goals conceded. In the European Cup, PSV were much less prolific, but even more defensively astute, defeating the French and Spanish champions Bordeaux and Real Madrid on away goals following 1-1 draws over 2 legs in the quarter and semi-finals, before beating Benfica on penalties following a 0-0 draw in the final. What makes PSV's 1987-88 season arguably even better than Ajax's 1994-95 campaign is the fact that they managed to win the treble, with glory in the KNVB Cup, ensuring that PSV won every competition they entered that season, winning the league emphatically, whilst exhibiting an incredible grit and resilience against Europe's very best in the European Cup. Very nearly, the perfect season. 4th, Barcelona. 2010-11. Barcelona had 2 awe-inspiring seasons under Pep Guardiola. Well, actually, they had all 4, but historically brilliant ones, there were 2 of them, namely his first season in 2008-09 and his third season in 2010-11. Both made my shortlist for this 7, and from a trophy perspective, you could argue that the 2008-09 season was the more impressive. Barcelona won a continental treble, La Liga, the Copa del Rey, and the UEFA Champions League, becoming the first Spanish club to win all 3 in a single season. They are still the only Spanish team to have won all 3, though they have now done it twice, having replicated the feat in the 2014-15 season. In the 2010-11 season, by contrast, Barcelona failed to win the Copa del Rey, losing 1-0 in extra time against Real Madrid in the final, though they still technically won a treble because they also won the Spanish Super Cup. Nonetheless, I still think that the 2010-11 season was Barcelona's greatest, and the 4th greatest in the history of the sport, and I'll try to explain why. Whereas in 2008-09, Barca lost 5 games in La Liga, albeit they still won the league by 9 points, in 2010-11 they only lost 2 games, amassing an enormous 96 points, and in the Champions League, whereas in 2008-09 there was some controversy surrounding Barcelona's semi-final success against Chelsea, in a very evenly fought tie, in the 2010-11 season they blew everyone out of the water. Barcelona only conceded 21 goals in La Liga in the entire 2010-11 season, while scoring 92. They famously thrashed Real Madrid 5-0 at the Camp Nou, and in the Champions League, they beat Real Madrid once again, winning 3-1 on aggregate, despite Jose Mourinho's best attempts to turn a football match into a UFC fight, before toying with Manchester United in the final at Wembley Stadium. This was a Manchester United team, by the way, that won the Premier League title by 9 points that season, starring the likes of Rio Ferdinand, Nemanja Vidic, Michael Carrick, Ryan Giggs and Wayne Rooney, and Barcelona made them look more like Bolton Wanderers, popping passes around them in midfield like it was a training session, and punishing Manchester United at will. The 3-1 scoreline, if anything, flattered Barca's opponents. This was the greatest Barcelona team of all time, and quite possibly the greatest club side ever assembled. The movement of Pedro and David Villa was devastating, Messi was the best player on the planet, the axis of Xavi, Busquets and Iniesta were all pretty much at the peak of their powers, and Barcelona's backline was also rock solid, blessed with the likes of Dani Alves, Carlos Puyol, Gerard Piqué, Javier Mascherano, Eric Abidal and Victor Valdez. A frightening team, and only their failure to win the Copa del Rey, losing to Real Madrid in the 113th minute, prevents this season from ranking even higher than 4th. 3rd, Celtic, 1966-67. It might seem sentimental or nostalgic to some people to lionise Celtic's Lisbon Lions from the 1966-67 season, elevating them above the Barcelona team of 2010-11, but this was just objectively, by almost any metric, one of the greatest seasons of all time. Celtic won literally every single competition they entered: the Scottish Division 1, the Scottish Cup, the Scottish League Cup, the Glasgow Cup, and the European Cup, to win the rarest and most remarkable of quintuples. Celtic scored a world record 196 goals across the course of the campaign. They only lost 2 league games all season, both of them, incidentally, against Dundee United. They won every single game in the Scottish League Cup, back when it was still a league and knockout format, before beating Rangers in the final, and then they beat Aberdeen 2-0 in the final of the Scottish Cup, in front of almost 130,000 people. In the European Cup, Celtic beat Vojvodina in the quarter-finals, who'd already knocked out Atletico Madrid. They beat Dukla Prague in the semi-finals, who'd already knocked out Anderlecht and Ajax. And in the final, they beat the favourites Inter Milan, who were Italian champions and had won 2 out of the last 3 European Cups, overcoming Helenio Herrera's super team of Bergnic, Facchetti and Mazzola, coming back from 1-0 down after just 7 minutes to win the game 2-1. Inter might have been the favourites, but Celtic had a super team all of their own, starring the likes of Billy McNeil, Jimmy Johnston and Stevie Chalmers, all expertly marshalled by the great Jock Stein, and, in truth, if it weren't for a masterclass by Inter's goalkeeper, Giuliano Sarti, Celtic would have won the game by more. From the 7th minute onwards, when they went 1-0 down, it was a final which consisted of wave after wave of Celtic attacks. Commenting after the match, Jock Stein stated, quote, "Winning was important, but it was the way that we won that filled me with satisfaction. We did it by playing football. Pure, beautiful, inventive football. There was not a negative thought in our heads." End quote. So Celtic are third on merit, but if you want to get sentimental, it is truly remarkable that the first British European Cup winners was a team which consisted solely of local-born players who'd played together for almost all of their lives. Benfica are the only other team to have won the European Cup with, technically, an entirely domestic team, but whereas their 2 best players, Mario Coluna and Eusebio, were born and raised in the Portuguese colony of Mozambique, every single one of Celtic's players was born within 30 minutes of Celtic Park. Second, Ajax, 1971-72. I was reluctant to include the same team twice in this 7, just sort of optically, but the reality is, both Ajax's 1994-95 and 1971-72 seasons were absolutely out of this world. Having started this 7 with the Dutch Giants, we very nearly ended it with them too, and to my mind, Ajax's 1971-72 season is the greatest in the history of European football. This was Ajax's first season since 1965, without legendary head coach Rinus Michels, but in it, his project actually reached its annus mirabilis under Romanian head coach Stefan Kovac. An Ajax team starring Wim Serbia, Ruud Krol, Johan Neeskens, Arie Haan, Jerry Muren, Piet Keizer and Johan Cruyff was absolutely unplayable. This was what total football looked like when it had been honed and mastered for almost a decade, with its greatest exponent at his peak. Cruyff was inspired, scoring 33 goals in all competitions from effectively a free roll, but he wasn't alone. Ajax won 30 out of a possible 34 games in the Eredivisie, their only defeat coming against Go-Ahead Eagles just 4 days before the first leg of their European Cup semi-final. Kovac's men beat their great rivals Feyenoord 5-1, PSV 4-1, and on the final day of the Eredivisie season, they beat Vitesse 12-1, with Cruyff scoring 4 goals. They won the KNVB Cup without too much trouble to make it a double, and then they won the European Cup for the second successive season to turn it into an incredible treble. It meant that Ajax had won every competition they entered, and they'd done it all playing some of the most exhilarating and innovative football the continent had ever seen. Dynamo Dresden, Marseille, Arsenal, Benfica, and finally Inter Milan were Ajax's victims in the European Cup, Cruyff scoring both goals in a 2-0 win, ironically, in Rotterdam in the final. The following season, Ajax made it a hat-trick of consecutive European Cups, and Cruyff made it a hat-trick of Ballon d'Ors. But both man and club, the two of them, forever inextricably tied, reached an almost otherworldly peak in the 1971-72 season. 0. Honourable mentions. I couldn't possibly name them all, as my shortlist for this video was exhaustive, but in anticipation of some of the comments, I thought that I'd best point out that, no, I promise you, I didn't just forget about your team's best ever season, it's just hard to whittle it down to 7. Famous trebles like Bayern Munich in 2019-20, Barcelona in 2008-09 and 2014-15, Inter Milan in 2009-10, Manchester United in 1998-99, and Manchester City last season all came close to featuring. Meanwhile, AC Milan in the 1993-94 season, when they won Serie A and the European Cup in pretty spectacular fashion, Red Star Belgrade in 1990-91, and Porto in 2003-04, also weren't too far off sneaking in. Rangers in the 1898-99 season, and yes, we are going that far back, had a very rare perfect league season, winning all 18 of their Scottish League Division 1 fixtures, and possibly would have made it in had they not also lost to Celtic in the final of the Scottish Cup that season. Celtic went invincible throughout a much longer league campaign in the 2016-17 season, as well as winning a treble, but a Champions League group stage exit meant that they couldn't possibly feature. And I have to give a special word to Ferencváros, who enjoyed the longest perfect season in the history of professional football, winning every single one of their 22 league games in the 1931-32 season. I know that you'll all remember it well. Elsewhere, Real Madrid had a pretty spectacular 2016-17 season, winning a quadruple and only losing 3 La Liga games all season, which was only slightly dented by a defeat over 2 legs against Celta Vigo in the quarter-finals of the Copa del Rey, and in the 2019-20 season, which almost saw Bayern Munich feature. It has to be said that if PSG had won that season's Champions League final, that really would have been one of the greatest seasons in the entire history of football. They ran away with the COVID-ended Ligue 1 title, only losing 3 games all season. They won the Coupe de France, beating Saint-Etienne in the final, the Coupe de la Ligue, overcoming Lyon on penalties, and the French Super Cup, winning 2-1 against Rennes. Domestically, therefore, PSG were flawless, winning a magnificent quadruple. So, had they won the Champions League final as well, instead of losing 1-0 against Bayern, I suspect that they would have snuck into this 7. Outside of Europe, I have to mention Boca Juniors' 2000-2001 season, when they won the Torneo Apertura in Argentina, with only 2 defeats to their name, beating the likes of Vasco, Palmeiras, and Cruz Azul en route to being crowned as the champions of South American football in the Copa Libertadores, and then won 2-1 against Real Madrid in the Intercontinental Cup, a game in which Juan Roman Riquelme made Claude Makelele look like he ought to be playing Sunday League football. And last but not least, Flamengo's famous 1981 campaign, in which they won the Campeonato Carioca, the Copa Libertadores, and the Intercontinental Cup, thrashing the European champions Liverpool 3-0 in Tokyo, at a time in which Zico was probably the best player on the planet. Those are my condensed honourable mentions, but there is still time, of course, for the small matter of top spot. First, Santos, 1962. There has never been a perfect season in football, that is to say, a season in which a team has won every single game in every single competition, but in any meaningful sense at least, Santos' 1962 season was just about perfect. Santos had a phenomenal team throughout the 1960s, spearheaded, of course, by the greatest player on the planet and arguably of all time, but the 1962 season was like a perfect storm. Not only was Pelé totally unplayable, age 21, the likes of Zito, Pepe, Gilmar, and Coutinho were all at the peak of their powers, and their manager, Lula, had managed most of them for almost a decade by that stage, having previously been the academy manager at Santos. What made it all the more special was the fact that Santos weren't one of Brazil's great clubs before the late 1950s, when Pelé and co burst onto the scene, arguably, even more spectacularly than Mika Richards.
I burst onto the scene, didn't I? And I was going to be the next best thing.
In 1962, Santos won the Campeonato Paulista, winning 25 and only losing one of their 30 games, scoring 105 and only conceding 28 goals in the process. That is an average of 3.5 goals a game scored and less than a goal a game conceded. They won the Taça Brazil, which was one of 5 straight Taça Brazil titles, beating Botafogo 5-0 in the final. They won their first ever Copa Libertadores, beating Penarol 3-0 in a final replay. And last but not least, they won the Intercontinental Cup, thrashing Eusebio's Benfica, the reigning European champions, 8-4 in aggregate, winning 3-2 at home and 5-2 in Lisbon. Just to round that up then, that is a quadruple in which Santos won every competition they entered, only lost 3 games across all 4 competitions, and averaged almost 4 goals a game, with perhaps the greatest player of all time at something close to his peak. Pelé scored 48 goals in 37 games in all competitions, and there were 7 Santos players in the Brazil team that won a second successive World Cup in 1962. So that is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. I hope that you liked it. Hit the like button if that was the case, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, which I will upload the first video on as soon as it hits 25,000 subscribers, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram or Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all 3, should you wish to do so, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.